It was a cold night when old Mr. Ram stumbled out of his son's home. The sky was a dark, heavy gray, and rain poured down in relentless sheets, soaking him to the bone as he tried to find shelter. He could hardly believe what had happened. His flesh and blood, Ravi and Mohan, had pushed him out of the house he had built with his own hands. In their younger days, his sons had been the joy of his life. They would sit by his side, listening to his stories about courage and love. They would ask for his advice, and he would beam with pride, knowing he had helped shape their futures. But now, they saw him only as a burden. Ravi and Mohan wanted to live without their old father slowing them down. Mr. Ram wandered through the streets, head down, until he found an empty corner under the awning of the local hospital's parking lot. It wasn't much, but at least it kept the wind and rain off his frail body. His only companion was a tattered, rolled-up shirt that served as his pillow. Each day, he watched the doctors and nurses come and go, their uniforms pristine as they did their duties. He imagined how different his life could have been if his sons had shown kindness. He missed the days when the house would be filled with the laughter of his children. Instead, the only sounds that accompanied him now were the whistles of the cold breeze. One rainy afternoon, while searching for scraps to eat, he noticed a small, colorful purse nestled against the wheel of a parked car. He hesitated momentarily, then picked it up, revealing stacks of money inside and a shiny card with a woman's name, Mrs. Sharma. She must have been worried sick about losing something so important. Though it could have solved many of his problems, he knew he couldn't keep it. He had never stolen in his life and wouldn't start now. After asking around, he learned that Mrs. Sharma lived in a large villa miles away. Even though it meant walking far in the rain, he set off toward her home with a borrowed umbrella to shield him. His bones ached, and his breath came in sharp, shallow bursts, but he couldn't turn back. He finally reached the gates and rang the bell, but the maid who answered eyed him suspiciously. Still, he held the purse out with both hands and said, "I found this at the hospital. It belongs to Mrs. Sharma." The maid disappeared momentarily, and Mr. Ram waited anxiously until she returned with the woman herself. Mrs. Sharma's eyes were puffy from worry, but when she saw the purse, her face lit up with relief. "Thank you," she said, her voice warm and kind. "Please, come in and have some tea." Mr. Ram was given a warm seat and a steaming cup of chai inside the villa. The scent of ginger and cardamom filled the air, reminding him of home. Mrs. Sharma thanked him repeatedly, then offered him a stack of bills. "You've done me a great favor, and I'd like to return it." But Mr. Ram shook his head. "Madam, your gratitude is more than enough." "Then stay for the night," she insisted. "We have a spare room." With no other place to go, he accepted. That night, he slept in a warm bed for the first time in months. Mrs. Sharma asked him to stay as the villa's gardener the following day. Her husband had passed away years ago, and she had no children, so the large garden had grown wild and overgrown. It needed the gentle hand of someone who knew how to coax flowers from the soil. Mr. Ram gladly took the job and moved into a small but cozy room in the servants' quarters. Every day he worked with care, trimming the bushes, watering the flower beds, and planting new seeds. The garden slowly came back to life, with bursts of color and scent filling the air. Mrs. Sharma often walked through it, her face brightening whenever she saw a new blossom. In return, she made sure Mr. Ram had everything he needed. He was well-fed, clothed, and most importantly, appreciated. He shared stories about his life, and she listened attentively. He had finally found someone who valued his wisdom. Months passed, and word of Mr. Ram's new life reached the ears of Ravi and Mohan. Realizing their father had a steady job and access to Mrs. Sharma's wealth, they showed up at the villa, claiming they wanted to reconcile. But Mr. Ram was not fooled. He had seen through their greed and knew better than to trust their honeyed words. When the two men demanded that Mr. Ram return home, Mrs. Sharma stood beside him and said firmly, "This is his home now. You have no place here." The gates were shut, and the two sons stood outside, fuming. Mr. Ram felt a weight lift off his chest as he looked at Mrs. Sharma. She smiled and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You deserve to be happy," she said. Mr. Ram continued to tend the garden in the following months, finding peace in the rich soil and colorful blooms. He learned that kindness could flourish even in the most barren places, and was determined to nurture that kindness for the rest of his days.